Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. You're listening to another installment of the NTC podcast. This is Aaron Washington, your host. Colin Murr is to my right. We are glad to be back with you guys on another episode. Colin, always great to be back with you, man. Your expertise are highly valued, and you know the stuff inside and out when it comes to CBA. And this is going to come in handy for today's talks. This trade season is pretty much ramping up here. It's right around the corner. So thanks for jumping back on, and should be a great time, man.
Yeah, I'm glad to be on again. I'm glad to be talking about these key deadlines that are coming up where, the trade landscape is going to change really quickly and a lot more players are about to become available. So it's going to get interesting real quick.
It really is. It already has been. If you look at the landscape of the NBA, and once we get to this part of the calendar, you start to see the chatter increase when it comes to players on the trade block. The Siakams, the OG Anunobys, the D'Angelo Russells, all those guys. The rumors just ramp up through the roof. So I think it's a great time for us to sit down, talk about a few dates on the calendar that's really going to apply to some of these players we're going to talk about, and how that's going to influence the teams they're on, and what we can see as a result of that. So, Colin, to jump right into this, man, we're going to look at a few dates. And the first date that's really relevant, because when you guys are watching this podcast, more than likely it's going to be on this day. So this is December 15th of this year. At this point in the calendar, we're looking at players that signed, free agents that signed a contract either on or before September 15th. So if they were in that window, then they are trade eligible when you get to December 15th. So when you get to that date, Colin, that means that a lot of players that signed in the summer can now be traded to other teams, which gives a lot of teams more flexibility. A lot of more guys are eligible. They can make a lot more deals. If there are certain players that have a really good mid-tier salary that they want to use to match and bring someone else back in, that becomes available to them. And to really kind of put this in perspective, I wanted to highlight one player that is an interesting case here. D'Angelo Russell signed back this summer for 2 years, $36 million with the Lakers. And what's interesting about his deal is that he had he basically waived his no trade clause as a part of his deal. So he is being heavily shopped at this time. Tomorrow, or pretty much today, if you guys are watching this on the 15th or later, he's trade eligible. So the Lakers have been rumored to be looking for a little bit of an offensive upgrade, a little bit more punch. Zach LaVine has been rumored to the Lakers, some other players. But, D'Angelo Russell is a guy that, they're looking to move on from. And I guess Russell knew that was a possibility, and he didn't mind it, so he waived the no trade clause. So he's on the block. He's officially on the block. They're making calls. You're going to see how this all shakes out. So that's where we stand as of pretty much today. This is trade season. It's open. Guys are available. It's not everybody. We're going to get to that in a minute. There are other players that are not going to be eligible for another month or so. So we'll get there. But Colin, what does this mean for teams? If you want to get into a little more detail here when it comes to December 15th, what's about to pop off here now that trade season is officially open?
Yeah, so like you said, I think this is one of the more general rules that I think a lot of our listeners might know, the December 15th date, where the majority of the free agents who signed this year become available. There's a couple of exceptions. One of them being if the player signed after September 15th, then the player has to wait, or the team has to wait to trade him until 3 months from the date of the signing, because it's the later of December 15th or 3 months from the date of signing. So most of them are going to be up now and available. And then we'll get into the ones where the team had to exercise full bird or early bird as well. But essentially what this does is, we're a quarter of the way through the season. The teams are figuring out who they are. They're looking at what they want to do, whether they want to acquire younger assets, go after a bigger fish. And now they have some assets available to them before some of these other trade deadline and key dates come up that we're going to talk about as well. So these guys come up right before some other key dates, that we have in a couple weeks, limit their ability for some trade ammunition. So it'll be interesting. Like guys like D'Angelo Russell, who, like you said, he waived. It sounds a little confusing because he just signed. But what he did was waive his implied no trade clause, which essentially is given to him based on the transaction that he signed, which we can get into in a little bit. But what he has to do is he has to waive it at the time he signs the contract. So he can't have the no trade clause, and then when the team is shopping him around, he's deciding what team he likes. He had to have waived it at the time of signing, so he can't pick and choose what team is going to. Whereas if he didn't waive it at that time, then that would be the situation. So,
For sure.
yeah, December 15th is going to open it up for a lot of other players.
Exactly, Colin. The Lakers situation is also interesting just because of the state they find themselves in. Of course, this is a high pressure scenario for the Lakers. Every season with LeBron is championship or bust for them. And, currently they're pretty good. I know they want to be better. They want to be at the top of the West. They believe they're good enough to be there. Anthony Davis has had a few explosive games. They have a great crew of a great supporting cast around LeBron. So they want to take the next step up. To this point, they're only about 21st, 22nd in offensive rating. So you talked about that 20 game mark, the quarter mark, just about where things start to become more clear. Things come into focus. And for the Lakers, they've gone through the in-season tournament. The potential is there. They won the tournament. They're hanging a banner for it. Obviously, they're very talented, but there are a few little holes, a few little deficiencies that kind of reared their head along the way. And it's been proven that once you get to this part of the calendar, numbers begin to solidify. Things are more set in stone. The variance starts to level out. People start to understand who they are, who they're not, who they want to be. And that brings us to the trade conversation. So for D'Angelo Russell, hey, we know he's a scorer. We know he's averaging 16 points a game right now, 6 assists. He's a great playmaker. He's shooting really well from the field, 47% from the field, high 30s, 38% from three. So he can put the ball in the bucket. He's had I believe it was a 40 ball not too long ago against the Pistons in Detroit. But when it comes to D'Angelo, there are deficiencies defensively. He gets picked on. And in a playoff scenario, more than likely he's going to get played off the floor. He's going to be subbed out for somebody that's a little bit more defensively focused. And there are some limitations to his offense as well. So for the Lakers, they get to this point in the calendar. Hey, D'Angelo's making a good amount of money. We know that he can bring us back a decent return. If you look at his contract here for this season, about $17.3 million for this season. So it's a pretty movable contract. You can get back a decent player with that. If you combine him with one or two other contracts, it gives them a lot of options, as you said. So that's why I wanted to highlight D'Angelo Russell and the Lakers because, hey, they're playing well, but there's another level they want to get to. And I think they believe that they need to make one more move to get there. And you got to give props to the Lakers. I mean, this is I think it's like the third season in a row that they've been looking to make a deal like this. And they made pretty solid midseason deals before that have brought back players who they extended. You think of like a Jared Vanderbilt, you think of Roy Hachimura, guys that are on this roster still. So, for the Lakers, let's see if they can keep it going, bring back another great contract and see what they can do. LeBron is still playing at a high level. So is Davis, but they got to capitalize because the window is definitely closing. So for D'Angelo, he could be the key to kind of bringing this all together and getting them to that next level.
Yeah, and the key part here, as we're a quarter of the way through the season, you're starting to realize who you are. The other side of the coin here is that there's a play-in tournament too, right? So there's only a few teams that know for sure that they're out of it, right? The Pistons of the world, the Spurs of the world, the Wizards of the world, and then the Bulls looking to rebuild here, right? So there's 4 teams out of that's not a lot that are in the sellers market, right? And then when you're talking about D'Angelo Russell, yeah, he's a good player. He's 27. He's on a 2-year deal. A team like the Bulls don't necessarily. That's not going to go with their timeline of a rebuild, right? He's going to be a free agent before they even know what they have in the young assets. When they hope that they have young assets when they're turning this thing around. So, you wonder if they have to link in a third team here, get more draft picks involved if they're looking to get someone from the Bulls or one of those other teams that are on the younger side that are looking to sell.
For sure. So we did mention that there's another date connected to this, the December 15th. This is a majority of the league, but it's not the entire league. So when you look at players that sign a contract for their own team for more than 20% of what their previous contract was worth, then we're looking at players that are not trade eligible until January 15th. So for these players, they still have another month to go before these teams can make a deal. And it's going to give them less time to maneuver because you're looking at about a month or less between January 15th and the trade deadline, as opposed to 2 months with players that are December 15th. And Colin, I brought up a couple examples here of players that fit this criteria. I'm willing to bet they don't get traded, but I mean, you never know in this NBA. These two players are PJ Washington and Kobe White, both restricted free agents this summer, and they re-upped with their teams for 3 years for both players. PJ was for a higher value of 46.5 over those 3 years, where Kobe White was 3 years for $33 million. And Kobe White, especially, that contract is looking pretty solid right now. They took a kind of a gamble because if you look at Kobe White's performance over the past few years, you see some flashes, you see some scoring ability, but nothing really sustainable. He comes into this season, he really just starts to kind of grow into his own with Lonzo Ball out for the season again, with Levine and DeRozan and trade rumors. It really kind of gives the Bulls a little bit more confidence to know that they're going to make good on this contract if Kobe White continues to play like this. And, I couldn't help myself. I had to bring out the Chicago shirt because the Bulls are probably
that time of year, it's trade season. It's that time of year.
Exactly, man. I mean, the Bulls are basically the trade capital of the world right now because you look at all these rumors. It comes back to Chicago because they want to blow it all up. They need to. Hopefully they want to, but they definitely need to because they're not going nowhere fast. So for Kobe White specifically, he's going to take a little bit more time to become trade eligible. But I want to believe at this point that he is a guy that's going to stick around for them because he's shown that, I mean, he's still a young player in his early 20s. He has some ability here. He's showing the scoring ability, a playmaking ability that wasn't there before. So maybe he can fill that void created by Lonzo Ball. If they ship out the other two or one of the other two, they still have a solid guard they can invest their future in at a pretty good contract, average annual value of 11 million. In this market, I mean, that's not bad at all. So that's the whole Kobe White situation. Did you want to expand on that at all, or do you have any thoughts about PJ Washington's situation?
No, I mean, as far as Kobe White goes, yeah, the trade restriction of January 15th, you don't think that he'd be included in a trade based on exactly what we were talking about just now, where D'Angelo Russell is 27 on a 1-year deal, doesn't really fit with what the Bulls would be. You'd think that they would want right now, whereas someone like Kobe White, who's on their team, is 23 on a very cheap 3-year deal. I mean, that's like the mid-level exception, right? So you don't think that he'd be up for a trade, but again, if you're going to get a huge haul for whatever reason, it might be something that you consider. But the other thing that's going to be interesting is if that was something where he'd be roped into a package for someone like DeRozan, that's where it creates issues for the next deadline that we're going to talk about, the December 29th deadline. So yeah, you don't think he's going to be traded, but like you said, in this NBA, you never know when another chip is needed in there to get the haul that you want. Teams are willing to do it.
For sure. I mean, Kobe White's situation is interesting. He's 23 years old. By the end of the season, he'll be 24. So, I mean, he's been around for a few years. This is his 5th season. Does have some experience. For the Bulls, it could go either way. I mean, it's not like he's a franchise cornerstone where he's unmovable. But at the same time, if you're looking to start over, you at least want some pieces to be able to carry over into the next era, next regime. So you're not starting from zero. And Kobe could really help them do that. I just wanted to point out his last 5 games because they've been really impressive for him, especially a scoring standpoint. On the second against the Pelicans, 31 points. He shot 10 for 17. You look at the 8th against the Spurs, 24 points, 9 of 15 from the field. The Bucks, that was an overtime game. He played 45 minutes, by the way, and he dropped 33 points on 12 of 20 from the field. His most recent game against the defending champion, Denver Nuggets, that was a 27-point game, 8 of 15 from the field. So you look at what Kobe White is starting to do. It looks like with every game he's gaining confidence. He's really starting to shoot the ball at a high level. All of these games except one over this 5-game sample have been 50 to 60% shooting. And this is a crazy stat. I didn't know this until recently, but I believe he is, I want to say 4th in the league right now in terms of made threes through this point of the season. So top 5, Colin, in the league, 3-pointers made.
Yeah.
So, I mean, he's really taken a step up, and he's showing the Bulls like, hey, I mean, I'm worth 11 million. I'm worth more than 11 million.
Oh,
If
absolutely.
this was next summer, I mean, we're talking about way different numbers.
Right. Right.
Huge
Yeah,
increase.
yeah, they certainly have him on a deal, and it's for 3 years, right? So they have him in a great spot. It's someone that you don't want to get rid of, but again, it's like another asset that the Bulls have if they need it. But yeah, certainly, if I'm the Bulls, that's someone that you want to keep around and hopefully start building the core with. Building a young core with when you're rebuilding that team.
That's a pretty cut and dry situation for them. Not quite as cut and dry if we're talking about the Charlotte Hornets and PJ Washington's situation. They have a little bit more depth at that position. They're still more of like kind of in limbo. They're trying to take a step up, but they're still the bottom tier of the standings here. For PJ Washington, looking at average annual value of about 15 and a half over 3 years, definitely making more money. He proved a little bit more before he came up for restricted free agency than Kobe White did, which is why he gained a little bit more money in that deal. But I mean, we're still talking about a guy that's in his early 20s, playing the 4, has some scoring ability. He's dropped some 30 balls, some 35s. He has that in his bag. But for the Hornets, it's okay. You have Miles Bridges. I'm guessing they don't bring him back. I've heard that this 1-year deal, it's going to be a one and done for his 7.9, and they're not going to bring him back for another deal. So you do have PJ, you do have Gordon Hayward, you do have Cody Martin. I'm thinking that they still want to invest in him for the long term. I mean, still a pretty good deal at that 15. We're talking about a little bit more than the mid-level exception for 3 seasons. And it's also a declining contract. That's something I'd actually forgot about until I looked it up. You go from 16 to 15 to 14 in year 3, even better value with how the cap is going to increase over the next couple of years. So definitely a good contract for PJ for the Hornets. I think we've talked about this a little bit on the podcast before about his deal back when it was originally signed, but definitely a good gamble for the Hornets here, I think. And even though, yeah, the Hornets are still kind of in limbo here, they're trying to take the next step. You got to feel pretty good about a future with PJ Washington on your team, filling that 4 position, sometimes the 5 position. He's pretty versatile as well, so that's a positive.
Yeah, I think in this type of NBA, he's a really good player to have that can do those different types of things for that team at a reasonable salary. A younger player, that's not the type of guy that you think the Hornets would want to get rid of. You think that they're trying to look at unloading Hayward and Rozier in any way that they can to free up the books. But again, same thing with like the Bulls. If it's the right deal and it makes sense after January 15th or on January 15th until the trade deadline, I mean, you got to do it. They're not performing again this year. LaMelo's hurt. He's been hurt for a while now. They got to make some bigger changes. And if he's one of the bigger assets that you have to bring back, whether it's draft picks or some other key piece to build around Williams and LaMelo, then you got to do it.
For sure. PJ does have to improve his consistency a little bit, though. I think Kobe hasn't beat out in that way so far this season. I mean, PJ is only at about 43% from the field. He goes up and down. He's been prone to that his whole career. So, at this point, it looks like Kobe White is the better value. If you're trying to get something back in a trade, people are going to jump more at Kobe White than PJ Washington. It just seems like that's how things are rolling right now. I wouldn't have bet on that before the season started, but that goes to show how fast things can change in this NBA landscape.
Yeah, it all depends on the team's needs too, right? If you need someone that they play very different types of games too, and they fill very different needs. So, and it all comes down to and whether the other organization that's looking to acquire a PJ Washington can say he's going to fit better in this system and be more consistent here, or we need him to do less because we're a better team. We're a playoff team. So that they might look at it very differently than us just looking at the results so far this season.
True that. Another date here, Colin, that's coming up here very soon. And again, if you're watching this podcast at a certain date, this might already be on the day you're watching this. So December 16th is the next day we're going to look at here. So if a team wants to acquire a player in a trade, then you want to trade him with other players. So aggregation we're talking about. He has to be acquired by the 16th. So, and then we're talking about if an exception is used to acquire that player. So this is a date that teams have to be aware of if they really want to get a player and then move them on for another deal, make something else happen. They have a plan of attack. They have several steps they want to follow here. The 16th is coming up really quick. It's in the same part of the season when you get to about that 20 to 22, 23 game mark. So, this is a really important time in the calendar for teams to do this. If we're talking about the 16th and you want to gather other contracts together and make some moves here. So this is something else teams need to be aware of and something we got to look out for. If there is a trade made, then there could be something else down the pipeline coming right behind it here. So what else do people need to know, Con, about the 16th and, what it can mean for the subsequent deals that will pop up as a result of that?
Yeah, so this rule is a little bit more intricate. It's actually new with the new CBA. So essentially, like you said, if a team acquires a player using a salary cap exception, and most notably that's going to be if you acquire a player in a trade and you're over the cap, you're using an exception to acquire that player, right? So if that happens, for example, we think about the 76ers and the Clippers, right? The 76ers acquired all these players, this mid-range salaries. They have to wait two months until they can flip those players and aggregate those players in another trade. So essentially, what the rule used to be is, of course, you have to do that. Then you'd have to acquire the player 2 months before the trade deadline. Well, that has passed now, right? Because it's February 8th. So the one wrinkle here is the one exception is if you acquire the player before December 16th, then you're allowed to aggregate that player in another trade that year on the trade deadline, the exact day of the trade deadline or the day before it. So that's like the weird wrinkle that they have here. So in general, it's 2 months. You can't flip a player and aggregate them in another trade for 2 months. But if you get them December 16th or before, you can then wait until the trade deadline and flip them again. So that's the one weird wrinkle here. And again, when I think about the 76ers, right, if they did that Harden deal, if they waited on that Harden deal until December 17th, then they wouldn't be able to take all those contracts. They would have no chance of trading those guys this year. And the one key piece here where that might be important is teams might be pressing to get that big deal done, like the 76ers might want to do, or another team, because the trade restrictions are going to get a lot tougher after the regular season ends, because the second tier teams, these teams can't aggregate at all. They can't aggregate contracts, and it's 1 for 1. So they might want to push to get the bigger deal done. And if they were able to acquire players to then flip, it might be easier to do. So it's a bigger date this year probably than some other years when you're thinking ahead. But yeah, just a weird little wrinkle in the new CBA.
It really is. And just going back to aggregation, it really is a concept that happens in not every trade, but I would say more often than not, they are aggregated trades. So you have multiple players being combined. A lot of times to bring back one player that's worth more or worth as much as 3 players, 2, 3, 4 players put together. So it's a concept that is very simple and we see it a lot, but it's something that teams can no longer take for granted because, like you said, those restrictions coming in next season, teams will not have the ability to do this. So, I mean, you're talking about I don't have a percentage here. I'm just really spitballing, but I'm willing to bet if you look at all the trades done over the past 5 years, like how many of those do you think are aggregated trades? I mean, are we about like 4 out of 5, something like that?
I mean, essentially, if you're trying to acquire a large contract like a James Harden, and second apron teams can't do it because you'd have to have another one large contract because you wouldn't be able to aggregate contracts to go get them. And the other limitation is the 100% of salary. You can't take on more. You can't keep taking on more salary.
Yeah.
So that's the other thing. So that's why I think teams are making the bigger pushes this year for the bigger trades. And that probably why, the Bulls obviously need to do it anyway, but they need to do it during the regular season because it's going to be so much harder to go. You can't go to the Warriors. If it puts the Lakers over the second apron, even the first apron, it's going to be hard enough. But you go to these teams, they're going to be limited in what they can do and the options that they have, no matter what they want to throw at you and to acquire the player.
Exactly. So the time is now. That's pretty much what we're talking about here. That's the name of the game. And over the next several weeks, we will see deals that reflect this. So I would expect more teams to be more active because of what's coming down the pipeline. The time is now. Do it while you have the chance, especially if you're in a win now situation, or the opposite, to where you guys are tearing it down, really starting over. You're going to need to make a deal like that in order to just give yourself the best package possible while it is on the table. And, while we're on the topic of December here, we're going to finish out the year. So we're talking about December 29th is the next big date here that's coming up on our calendar. And by the way, guys, if you're looking for these dates and you want to keep track of these, they're all going to be on our calendar on website, notradeclause.com. So if you go to our calendar page, all these are laid out for you. So if you're trying to remember what is what, where it falls on the calendar, that's going to be available for you there. But for the 29th, so if we're talking about players with 1 year left on their contracts, Colin, you brought up a great example. DeMar DeRozan. All roads lead back to the Bulls. So DeMar DeRozan is in this situation here. 1 year left on his deal. He has been a ton of trade rumors. He is the obvious choice to move on because of his age. Again, he doesn't fit that timeline. He's in his mid-30s. He probably wants to be on a team that has a better chance of winning. The Bulls are going nowhere this season, nowhere fast at all. So he needs to be traded by this date in order to give the team that team is going to the ability to extend him. Because if not, you're looking at a free agency situation and he can move on, and you never want to lose an asset for nothing. So if a team really wants to maximize the ability to not just acquire a guy like DeRozan, but retain DeRozan, especially on a more of a team-friendly deal, a cost-controlled contract possibly, before he hits the open market and he gets offers from other teams, you really want to give yourself the best chance to do that. So keep that date in mind, everybody, the 29th of December. And, we could see a deal like this. Maybe it is DeRozan. Maybe on the 28th, we see DeMar DeRozan moved to a team to reflect this deadline coming up and that whole extension role here. So that's something else to be aware of. And I'm going to be circling the names of several players like DeRozan, 1 year left, because they're in a unique situation to where the timeline is accelerated. You can't wait until the trade deadline. If you want to extend them right now, you can't wait until February, January. You got to get it done in the next couple of weeks here before the year is over.
Yeah, and just to break that down just a little bit more here. So essentially, and by the way, our man Anil did a great job describing the DeRozan deal and why his, the trade mill is going to pick up at the end of December for him for the specific reason. And he went through a lot of other good key pieces about the Bulls and their trade options and their situation on his YouTube page. So everyone should check that out as well. But essentially what the rule is if you acquire a player via trade, you for 6 months, you can't extend him for more than 4 seasons, or more importantly, for more than 105% of the player's prior salary. So that's the key piece here. Those limitations, by the way, will go up in the new CBA to 5 seasons and 120%. But why the December 29th is a key deadline? It's not a deadline written in the CBA. It's just a practical deadline, because what happens is December 29th, you make the trade. Well, 6 months after that is going to be June 30th, and that's the last day of the salary cap year. So if they're on a 1 year deal, if you wait until December 30th to make the trade, 6 months after that is going to be July 1st, and that player's contract expires. You can't extend him anymore, and he's a free agent. You risk him going to free agency. So these teams who are, giving up a huge haul for a player like DeRozan, they want to be able to extend him. He's not going to sign for more than 105%, you wouldn't think, of his current salary, right? So you got to get the deal done now so you have the ability to then negotiate and extend him before he becomes a free agent on July 1st.
That's well said, Colin. Thanks for breaking that down. So it really kind of puts, a team like the Bulls in a unique situation, or teams that are interested in acquiring DeRozan. It's just another layer to all of this. It's not just the teams can't just think about right now. I mean, that's definitely going to be the focus if you acquire a player like DeRozan that's still playing at a high level, fairly high level, age 34, 35. But you also want to give yourself the best chance to continue that and roll that over into future seasons. And again, there are stipulations coming in. There's limitations with this new CBA. So if there is an ability to make a deal this season, whether that's a trade, whether that's an extension, whatever the case may be, it's better to do it now before things get more complicated and maybe you lose the ability altogether. And I mean, you never know with a guy like DeRozan, maybe he gets traded to a team and the situation kind of goes off the rails a little bit. He's not as excited about the possibility to play there. So he wants to move on. And if you didn't make the deal before that date of the 29th, hey, maybe he says, I'm good. I'm going to leave in free agency. And for a guy like DeRozan, he's making a pretty good amount of money. This isn't a mid-level exception player. So you're going to need to send some assets back to acquire him. And you don't want to send those assets back if it means losing them for nothing. You don't want a 6-month rental of DeMar DeRozan. You want to be able to retain him at least for another year or so. That's we're probably talking about the end of his overall ability to play at this level, 2 or 3 seasons. Guys like him, probably not going to last until 38, 39. So it's better to get him on a good contract now while you have the chance so things don't go haywire a little bit farther down the road.
Yeah, and just to bring it back to the January 15th rule that we were talking about. If a team wanted to they want DeRozan now so they can extend him, but somehow they want to negotiate and get Kobe White in the deal. Both those things can't happen. It just can't be done, right? It's just the CBA stops that from happening. So those are just interesting little things that happen. It's, do you want to risk bringing him to free agency, or do you want Kobe White in the deal if that's something that could come to fruition? So those are the little intricate things that fans might not necessarily think of when they're thinking of, oh, I want that player and that player and that player. Well, sometimes the CBA just stops you from doing those things.
Yep, stops you cold in your tracks, man. Dead in your tracks.
Yeah.
Colin, do you have time to talk about the 1-year bird, or you gonna wrap it right now?
Yeah, I think I got it. I think I hear my family literally pulling up. So
Okay.
I think we're gonna wrap it now. But we were able to kind of mention it with D'Angelo anyways, which is good. So
yeah, that's true. That's true.
Yeah.
Well, hey, we're gonna wrap this up here. Colin, thanks so much for jumping back on another pod. Hard to believe we're 89 episodes in. We're hitting 100 before you know it. So stay tuned for that milestone, everybody. It's going to be a good time. And we'll have more conversations like this as the trade deadline approaches, as we get farther in the season. We'll have more nerd out sessions for you people that love the CBA and love everything it stands for and all the little stipulations that are involved with that. If you're looking for more content like this, like I mentioned before, check out our website, notradeclause.com. The graphics are there for you. The dates are there for you. The cap sheets, everything is available. So be sure to check that out when you guys get a chance. But Colin and I are signing out, everybody. Thank you for tuning in to another episode. And we hope to see you on the next one. Take care.